This advisory board lecture series, which is our fourth meeting, aims to promote knowledge exchange, address key global issues, strengthen networks, and drive policy impact, and inspire the debate. And let me warm-heartedly introduce Professor Gracia Liu-Farrer, who is Professor of Sociology at the Graduate School of Asia-Pacific Studies and Director of Institute of Asian Migration at Waseda University, Japan. Her research examines migration into Japan, transnational labor and student mobilities in East Asia, as well as between Asia and Europe. She hopes to bring Asian experiences to migration and mobility theorization. Her recent books include Handbook of Asian Migrants with her colleague, published 2018 by Routledge, Immigrant Japan, Mobility and Belonging in an Ethno-Nationalist Society by Cornell University Press 2020, Tangled Mobilities, Places, Affects and Personhood Across Social Spheres in Asian Migration, published by Bergham Books 2022, and The Question of Skill in Cross-Border Labor Mobilities were her colleagues, published by Taylor and Francis 2023. She has published journals, articles, and book chapters on migrants, ranging from Chinese students, Nepali restaurant workers to Syrian refugees, who her latest article published in 25 is about. Our encounter with Gracia was on the occasion of proposal writing of Link4Skills, which was in 21, I need to say 21-22, where the great social special issue in Journal of Ethnic and Migration Studies was published on social construction of skill in migration context. So I myself was incredibly inspired by this work, which is both empirical but also towards theoretization of skill in migration context. Last year, we just were recalling Gracia visited Warsaw and Link4Skills on the kickoff meeting, presenting also part of her work, and now we have a great moment to share our discussions and outcome of this discussion through today's lecture, The Social Construction of Skill in International Labor Migration Perspectives from Asia. So, Gracia, the floor is yours. Please share your screen, and I will have also the privilege to be your discussant, but I hope that our Asian colleagues will support me in that, and all other colleagues as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Isabel, for your very kind introduction. Can everybody see my screen now?
Yes, but just make full screen, because yes, great.
Is it now full screen? So is the screen fine right now?
Yes.
Great.
Yes.
Excellent, because I'm not used to a team. I understand the team is very standard in Europe.
Sorry, one more moment. Can we get your consent for recording? Sorry, Gracia,
yes.
because it's this formal thing. I forgot, and we need to have it for for webinar, and I hope all others in the room as well, so we can start recording.
Yeah. Thank you, Isabel, and everybody for joining. Actually, this article, I presented a draft of it last year, exactly a year ago, also at the Links4Skills workshop, and I received feedbacks, and so I completed manuscript, and now it's actually published at Annual Review of Sociology. And so by the end of this talk, I will upload the paper into the chat. So it's the complete version will be will be uploaded later. So as you can see, I changed my title to Perspectives from Asia in the process of reviewing a vast repertoire of literature. I realized, I'm from Asia, and my perspectives are very much limited to the migration out, in, and in between countries in Asia. I can say nothing about Africa or Latin America. And so today I will present my perspectives from the migration experiences in Asia. So I also want to kind of thank the people who were at a workshop last April, and some of the insights were from your suggestions. So basically, I think this will be a more kind of updated version of that. So basically, what I try to kind of show you with my review article is essentially it's a review article. So the article reviews over 100 studies done in Asia about the skill mobility and the labor issues. So basically, as we all know, after especially the World War II, skill-based selection emerged as one major migration policy among advanced nations in North America or Europe and Oceania, replacing race and a religion-based criterion for migration selection. Because after World War II, with human rights regime, you cannot select migrants based on race or religion or nationality, but skill becomes the legitimate criterion. However, many critiques have mentioned that is this skill-based selection policy actually a neutral or objective one? However, we also see in contemporary migration a few criteria wield as much influence as the evaluation of skills in determining an individual's mobility, place of residence, employment, permitted activities, and duration of their stay. So, skilled migrants are sought after as human resources, while those deemed unskilled or low-skilled are treated as disposable temporary labor. And so what appears to be a non-discriminatory migration policy also generates a new form of inequality. As I said, credentials held by migrants from different racial and national backgrounds are not equally valued. Skilled migrants might not have skilled jobs to match their credentials, and skill waste and skill mismatch are witnessed in almost all receiving countries. So the literature on the persistent phenomena of skill waste and skill mismatch, I broadly, categorize them into three themes. The first strand is rooted in the tradition of feminist scholarship and the critical theories. So the feminist scholarship exposes the prevalence of skill mismatch and the wastage observed among highly skilled migrants in countries where such migration programs are implemented, particularly among women and ethnic minorities. For example, skilled women participated in the labor migration, but their career mobilities and lives as migrants are heavily influenced by immigration regulations and their roles in the household. The second approach, I think probably the most used approach, is a Bourdieusian approach, which feminist scholarship also sometimes employs. It uses Bourdieu's framework of capital and field, highlighting that not only the challenges of converting cultural capital across national borders, but also the institutional barriers and the structural inequalities will impede the conversion of capital. So migrants with good credentials cannot work in the destination countries because of the different cultural and institutional barriers like language and professional credentialization, etc. And the third strand of research furthers the discussion by problematizing the concept and the categorization of skill itself. So this scholarship questions the arbitrary nature of skill categories in the migration policies, pointing out that the definitions, criteria, utilities, and applications of skills in the migratory process are full of ambiguities and malleabilities, very, very unclear. And also migrants learn skills in the process. So this kind of insights from this kind of a scholarship leads to the understanding that skill is not objectively quantifiable by proxies such as years of education, credentials, and educational categories. The metrics adopted in migration policies seldom correlate with actual practices because migrants' ability to leverage their skills depends on complex social and political negotiation. So this is where the introductory article described as Isabel just showed, the notion of social construction of skill. Basically, we try to use this concept to synthesize the previous scholarship. We argue that this concept takes as a point of departure the notion that skill in cross-border labor mobility, and as such, the idea of high or low-skilled migrants is a concept socially constructed by a constellation of actors in specific local, national, transnational, and global context. So essentially, this is a very, I'm a sociologist, trained sociologist, and it's a very sociological concept. And it tries to encapsulate the phenomena surrounding the valorization of skill in labor mobility across national borders. And we try to highlight that skill is defined, institutionalized by various actors within specific local, national, transnational, global context, and problematizes skill categories. We actually mentioned that, we've emphasized that this kind of skill categories were established by governments primarily in the global north to manage and control migrants primarily from the global south. This concept also emphasizes the processes of skill construction in the sending countries, transnational context, and the post-migration experiences. So it's a continuous constructive process. And using the social construction skill, we also want to, in a sense, recenter migration studies, expanding research attention from migration practices and migrant experiences in Europe and white settler-dominated societies in North America and Oceania to the rest of the world, making room for insights that foster a critical understanding of the practices and implications of international skill mobility and labor migration. As the researchers have pointed out, even though, for example, Asian migrants are currently the most numerous population, is the largest population on the move. The scholarship out of Asia, of people based in Asia, takes up about 6% of the entire scholarship and on migration. So I think that my effort is partially to bring some experiences and perspectives from Asia to the discussion on the labor mobility, international labor mobility. Let me see. Okay, so first of all, we can take a look at how Asia is positioned in the global skill mobility. It's first of all is a skill sending region. It's the traditional skill sending region. Many Asian countries rely on labor and skill export for economic revenue. And migration is a state development strategy in many countries. The governments in sending countries are actively engaged in marketing, brokering, and managing its migrant population. So countries actually try to upgrade skill profiles of their migrant labor through training, testing, and credentialization. For example, countries such as India and Bangladesh are pushing for standardized skill qualification frameworks for the export labor, so their workers' skills could be recognized by employers. And also in countries such as Indonesia and Sri Lanka, the governments try to credentialize domestic workers. They aim to protect these what they consider as vulnerable women migrants. At the same time, this professionalization trains domestic workers with language and work skills, and also instills in them work ethics and how to be docile and emotionally resilient for their future job placements. However, researchers argue that such efforts, state efforts, and ability to enhance its migrant labor force skill profile is uneven. It is constrained by both the transnational labor demand and gender ideology and the political interest. For example, why only women migrants? Anthropologist Andy Chan's study of Indonesian labor migration shows that the government could credentialize domestic workers because of the labor demand and their being women. Domestic labor is in high demand in many Asian countries such as Hong Kong, Taiwan, and because for previous incidents of abuse, and the states takes a paternalistic approach to these women. However, the states are not doing the same for male factory workers because that kind of jobs, the competition lies on the worker side. So they're actually paying to work on those jobs. So the government cannot really provide a credentialization for workers such as factory workers. And the other thing is who are the actors and who govern in Asia. A lot of this migration governance actually is dependent on migration industry, and is an ensemble of profit-driven intermediaries, and they do both governance, management, and skill production. In the Philippines, for example, Yasmin Ortega finds that the government incentivizes a very large private and higher education institution to train skilled workers for export in various professional services, such as nursing and hospitality, pilots, etc. But who bears the cost? It's the individual aspiring migrants and their families who not only bear the costs of such training, but also when the transnational labor market experiences fluctuation, for example, the demand for such labor is curtailed, they also suffer a loss. So the power balance in the whole kind of labor sending regime and management is very uneven. The second role Asia occupies in the global skill mobility is really as a container, has a lot of kind of skill mobility within and into Asia. I'm sorry, it should be within and into Asia. There are a lot of intra-regional mobility, first of all, because Asia is such a vast continent with a very uneven economic development. So there are hinterlands, according to Khalid, so many migrants from Asian countries will actually go to other Asian countries to work. And sometimes the best, the highest echelon of those workers will go outside of Asia, but increasingly they're being recruited and attracted to other advanced Asian economies, such as Japan or Singapore. There are also inbound mobility, a lot of skill migration from more, from outside Asia is coming to work in Asia. And some of the, for example, one of my former students, Helena Hoff, studies young people from European countries who moved to Singapore and Tokyo for career mobilities as well as for adventure. And Alu's study of those Arabic migrants, the second generation of Arabic migrants in France, they call Arab Europeans. They are disadvantaged by their minority status in European countries where they hold citizenship status and have their education. they return to Middle East to seek better careers or to obtain higher social status. So there's such a kind of flows from outside into Asia as well. But one thing that's a very characteristic of this sort of a mobility flow within and into Asia is its temporariness. The majority of the migration is temporary. Asian countries are mostly ethno-nationalist countries and the post-colonial nation states. There are a lot of anxiety about the boundaries and about population management. So labor contracts are oftentimes temporary. This extends to highly skilled workers as well. So there's this term called precarious talents. For example, a lot of professionals in Singapore, because the country's restrictive migration policies and the competitive economy and the labor market conditions, a lot of these migrants have employment insecurities and involuntary mobilities. Their visas are tied to their employment. When they lose their jobs, they have a very short window period, like 30 days, to find another employer to be able to continue their residency in the country. So this kind of visa pressure weakens their labor market positions, making them less selective about career opportunities, leading to permanent temporary residence. So this kind of difficulty in settlement happens to both, a more low-wage menial labor as well as professional workers. The third position Asia occupies in global skill mobility is as a place of return. As we see, this is the kind of trend after going out. Now you're coming back. Being historically the source region, return migration has been a significant mobility trend. A typical pattern of return is initiated by sending states talent programs to turn brain drain to brain gain, linking skill mobilities to the nation's developmental aspiration. For example, India has a large pool of domestic skilled workers, but sometimes, this sort of state policies also very differentiate in different countries. So Malaysia and India will have different approaches to return. India has more such workers in the country. Also, they as a hub of Asian skill migration. They also have workers from Bangladesh and Pakistan. So instead of bringing back the Indians, the government aims to attract capital investment from overseas Indians to invest in its economy. Malaysia, on the other hand, implements policies to bring back their diasporic educated and those workers who have worked overseas. The same goes for Singapore and China. They have all kinds of policies try to induce the return of skills. But a co-ethnic return also in Asia also expresses a nation state's desire to maintain an ethno-nationalist identity and a political compromise in the domestic debate on migration. So bringing back those co-ethnic from overseas is not going to jeopardize the kind of so-called population ethnic homogeneity. This happens to Japan, for example, bringing back workers from South America, like Brazil, where there has over 1 million ethnic Japanese, or the Chinese back to China. That also reflects the government's kind of ethno-nationalist vision of its country. So these are the kind of different positions Asia occupies in the global skill mobility. Now I'm going to discuss a little bit about the critical issues in the skill mobility in Asia. So what actually is at stake? First of all, I argue the skill construction process in the labor mobility out of, within, and into Asia reveals that skill is both an embodied and disembodied power. Skill is embodied in the sense that owing to colonial legacy and the patriarchal structure, individuals ascribed characteristics such as gender, race, and nationality become signifiers of skill, leading to different migrant groups, the divergent labor market, and mobility outcomes. So researchers found that skill is colored. So, for example, in Canada, foreign credentials and skills held by visible minorities such as Black, Chinese, or South Asian are undervalued, while those held by white migrants overvalued. Such racial hierarchy as a colonial legacy manifests itself in the context of migration in Asia, and I will argue in more sharpened form. Demographic characteristics such as being white and having European citizenship are status symbols that continue to matter in Asia, as the Alou and the Helena Hoff's studies have shown. People with these ascriptive statuses are perceived to possess specific or sought-after skills, which results in social and economic advantage to varying degrees. In the transnational culinary field, like the food world that James Farrer describes, race and ethnicity become embodied capital, signifying one's qualification and projecting the authenticity of cuisine. So if you run a Spanish restaurant, you better look white, basically. And you have to have a Spanish nationality to go with it. So this is a kind of embodied skill, but it is also dehumanizing. It's a form of decontextualized and bureaucratized human capital, does not correspond to the migrant person's actual ability and skill. It's rather determined by their economic and legal positions, that they are placed in. For example, this Iskander in Qatar did a research on this construction workers in Qatar's FIFA construction. She observes that the term skilled versus unskilled are rarely used to indicate people's actual competence. Migrant workers can be skilled and well-trained, but are not put into the category of skilled, but put in the category of unskilled because that's how they are placed occupationally. So in a sense, there is this connection between skill and the person. You judge a person's their accesses to rights, to freedom, to mobility, solely by the position they occupy. So if they're construction workers, you are not considering that they actually have higher educational credentials. Their freedom is determined by their job as construction worker. So this is really a so-called human capital that's really dehumanized, right? It's their economic position that determines their legal and social economic status. The other category is the perpetuated de-skilling. This is actually the item I picked up from our discussion at a workshop a year ago. I remember is Mala, who questioned me on this and made me really do a further kind of thinking on how to bring out the critical issue in the skill mobility. So de-skilling it's a very common phenomenon. We observe that in Europe, in Canada, in North America. However, in Asia, it has its particular rendition, I would say, particular variety. This kind of de-skilling is really in Asia oftentimes caused by the temporariness of the labor contract, because the majority of labor placement in Asia is temporary, as on contract. So workers, because of time limit contract and also the utilitarianism, instrumentalism of this sort of labor placement, many skilled workers not only do not improve or acquire skill in the destination country, but instead experience skill downgrading or skill loss. Because in the destination countries, receiving states, they oftentimes have a racialized assumption of what migrant workers' labor market positions are, instead of what they are trained or they're able to do. For example, in Japan, you have Filipino or Indonesian nurses coming in as care workers for old folks' homes, because that's what the government wants to recruit those Southeast Asian women to do. And but at the same time, in order to ensure quality, they want these people to have nursing certificates or credentials and higher education diploma, but they're placed on short-term temporary labor contract to help clean elderly. What that results in is these trained nurses maybe have a college diploma. They're not using their nursing skills after they land in Japan, and instead they are just doing an assistant job in the care homes. So after fulfilling the contract, they essentially have lost the original skills as nurses. So when they actually go back to their countries, they're no longer able to take up their previous professions as nurse, nor can they, and so the reintegration becomes a huge problem for such a kind of skilled workers placed on temporary labor contracts. And I think this is also is a kind of issue with the sending countries, because sending governments only sees the potential of the remittances and that this kind of skill placement or dispatch can bring, and not considering enhancing these people's skill and for potential developmental objectives. So this is something I feel like maybe we could also discuss whether in other contexts this happens. This is I want to emphasize this is actually a kind of phenomenon that's created by our destination governments and sending governments, as well as individual migrants sometimes and their families themselves. It's a kind of myopic vision of skill mobility. And the third critical issue is really transnational mobility as a skill. So this is something the migration policies of destination countries do not see, because the migrants acquire skill through mobility, and oftentimes it is this sort of cross-border mobilities that give migrants who officially don't have a lot of cultural and professional skills, the kind of skills that actually will be used in the destination countries or their future career development. Let me see. Yes. So, and also migration could be a form of a capital. For migration skill acquisition through mobility, I witnessed a lot in my fieldwork, seeing how the so-called undocumented workers or so-called unskilled manual labor, they actually managed to acquire linguistic skills, a lot of professional skills. However, because of their legal institutional restriction, by being the so-called put in the brackets of low-skilled or undocumented migrants, they're not able to use their skills, and then oftentimes they're getting deported or being dismissed. So the other thing is the migration. We also have to have a developmental kind of vision. It's migration itself is a form of capital. I think people have pointed out that people who are able to move tend to accumulate social cultural capital, and they also tend to have accumulated cosmopolitan vision. So in some Asian contexts, for example, in the migration from Vietnam to Japan, there are a lot of IT workers in Japan, and Vietnamese firms are interested in hiring those IT workers who have worked in Japan back to work in Vietnamese IT firms, because the experience of working in Japan became a badge of honor, or it's a credential of being able to suffer the Japanese corporate culture. And also you have this training in Japanese work environment. So this migration experience itself has become a kind of a capital that actually has values. So I think I might be ahead of the time. What I want to conclude is that, so first of all, I think the scholarship I have reviewed here focuses on the skill construction of a phenomenal skill construction in the cross-border labor mobility in an Asian context. It emphasizes the influence of neoliberal globalization on reconfiguring domestic politics and economies worldwide, and the enduring legacy of colonialism. And in Asia, most of Asian countries are post-colonial countries. So this sort of colonial legacy has lasting influence on Asians' education, as well as labor mobility processes. The Western country is really in the Asia, this sort of uneven development and the skill mobility underscores the West continues to dominate knowledge production and assess the criteria by which the skills of the global labor force are evaluated, utilized, and rewarded. We still see the racial hierarchy in Asia as well. By emphasis on the Asian perspective, also wants to highlight the urgency to incorporate experiences of non-Western societies into migration theory building. Scholarship on Asia emphasizes the role of the state in producing and commodifying skill and perpetuating racial hierarchies in the migration process. It also reveals the ambivalent yet interdependent relationships between the state and the intermediaries in producing, brokering, and regulating labor for skill export. Because in Asia, this government and the brokerage and industries all serve as important infrastructure for labor mobility. These observations offer insights into the mechanisms leading to uneven migration outcomes for individual migrants and the varied developmental impacts on sending societies. And also, given the dominance of temporary labor migration schemes in Asia, there is a growing interest in understanding the transnational process of skill building and career making. Research on transnational processes or institutions, such as the emergence of a transnational culinary field or the cross-border IT labor market, pays close attention to transnationalized skill construction processes. Recently, I have also been focusing on the healthcare workers migrating out of, for example, Indonesia to different destinations, see how this sort of transnational labor market and this different kind of labor regimes are cultivating different kinds of transnational skill mobilities and career paths for these individual migrants. Approaching skill mobility in international migration from the lens of social construction of skill, however, I will point out is that it poses challenges for social scientific researchers of labor migration. It calls for a reconsideration of the use of skill categories in labor migration research. The concept of social construction of skill underscores the arbitrariness and injustice involved in skill categorization. While being critical of receiving countries' selective migration policies, to bring back their selective migration policies and problematizing hierarchical skill categories. We researchers, and myself also included, we often adopt a label such as high or low skilled in selecting and describing research subjects. This analytical choice, I am aware, is very problematic when it is made in labor receiving countries, and especially when it's made in labor receiving countries. It unintentionally reproduces the political categories that embody an arbitrary and static notion of skill that we seek to challenge. Moreover, I understand that by compartmentalizing research subjects in this way, we restrict our field of exploration and limit our insights. It is crucial to remember that the process of skill production and selection begins before migrants enter the borders of receiving countries. A social construction of skill perspective, therefore, demands a critical reconsideration of labeling migrants, and it calls for broadening research subjects and adopting a more transnational perspective on the contingencies and the processes of migrants' social and spatial mobility. So this is something I think I wrote this article, but in my conversation with colleagues in presentations, it's so difficult to escape the categorization of people as highly skilled, low skilled, unskilled. And it has become such a fixed term. So I think when there's no alternative to that, how can we, in a sense, be critical of such categories, at the same time do the research that we intend to do? And I think we should be aware that by categorizing these people, we're essentially already pigeonholing these people. So how can we just break this kind of a container? How can we bring this social construction perspectives into our examination as an issue I think we urgently need to consider? And finally, I mean, as I mentioned, the caveat of my review is really I focus mostly on Asia. I did as much as I could to be more exhaustive of Asian experience, but I also understand this is not an Asian issue, and it should be applicable in other world regions, such as Africa and Latin America. When I was originally thinking of reviewing this article, I was thinking of the global south, but then it's too vague. I received a lot of critiques at a workshop as well, and the concept is vague, and who belong to global south, and it becomes a big issue. So I limited it to Asia. But at the same time, I understand in Africa, this is also very de-skilling, for example, and the racialization is a huge issue in the African labor mobility, labor mobility out of Africa as well. And Latin America also presents an interesting case because some of Latin American countries actually had a relatively free mobility, or at least experiment of free mobility for a couple of decades. So how this sort of social construction of skill actually unfolds or is manifests in that kind of a context is also something I think we could look into. So I think I'll stop here. Sorry, I know this presentation is a bit boring, and it's a review piece after all. I just hope we will have the platform or opportunity to discuss some of the issues. So I will stop here, and I welcome any comments and questions and critiques.
Okay, thank you very much, Gracia. It was great again. Food for thought and provoking, especially Link4Skills, but also beyond. So as I'm having the role of discussant here, Rajan, would you like to listen to first me, or would you have pertaining question which needs to be asked now? How would you prefer to proceed?
I can listen to you and then I can ask question. Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much. So I will try to go into dialogue with your work and Link4Skills, what we already did midway of the project, which will be also indirectly informing you what's up there and what are our struggle as well. So Professor Farrer's lectures powerfully highlights the social and political constructiveness of skill in migration regime, a concept that is not merely academic, but foundational for the way life's futures and labor market outcomes of migrants are shaped. So I would like to raise 7 points, or maybe 6, which are relevant for this talk. And the first point is about debunking the objectivity of skill, who defines and who benefits. And I think that, Gracia, you raised this core critique that migration policy regimes in high-income countries present skills as objective, measurable, and technocratic criterion. In reality, it is deeply political, often serving to legitimate selective inclusion while reinforcing global hierarchies. So the question is, who gets to define what is skilled labor? And I have this dilemma, why a nurse, for instance, from Philippines has always difficulties in recognizing or needs certification in Germany, while IT worker from India is assumed to be competent upon arrival. So this is this big divergence which is here. In our Link4Skills concept paper, we recognized this distortion and suggested, after you Gracia, constructivist shift in migration discourse, but we stop short truly of dismantling the economic rationalism embedded in EU migration frameworks. So challenge here is even social science research, including projects like ours, Link4Skills, risks reproducing these biases when skill categories are imported wholesale from destination countries, labor taxonomies, and obviously European Union takes part in this procedure. The second point relates to Asia as sort destination, and this point which you raised, devaluate in both, that the critical insights of yours, and I think it's great and it shouldn't be any hesitation about that, your regional lens, which is crucial here, that we are able to understand what is happening between a continent, because Asia is no longer merely a supplier of skilled labor. It is simultaneously a site of high skilled demands, return migration, and contested migration policies. However, its skills are persistently devalued even in intra-Asian mobility, which is absolutely crucial. So in Link4Skills in inventory, which origin countries conducted, countries like India or Indonesia are shown to produce surpluses of STEM and nursing graduates, yet face domestic source shortages due to out-migration and internal labor mismatches. So I would like to put a provocation here. So what explains this paradox, if not the structure under evaluation of skills developed, you said about the global south, I would say developed outside of the global north. And is this idea which you mentioned of circulation of skills ideal more rhetorical than real, especially when migrants face de-skilling and downward mobility, even in a more or less constructed spaces, like we call them migration skill corridors in Link4Skills, but in the EU policy language, they are called talent partnerships or skill partnerships. And are these partnerships, corridors, circularity or neo-intake of labor? Of course, the concept sounds collaborative, but in practice, do they institutionalize neo-extractive logics of intake of labor, yes, which I'm critically looking at Link4Skills and our great concept, and I invite colleagues from Link4Skills for discussion. So Link4Skills were advocating for fair migration. We are even writing the book, Link4Skills, Balanced and Fair Skill Flow. The logic rests to a certain degree on a development logic that assumes surplus labor in origin countries can be harnessed to fill gaps in destination countries without undermining local needs. But empirical question is there, and empirical tension is there. For instance, the Philippines has a structural shortage of construction workers domestically, not only Philippines, but for instance, the country of Link4Skills, yet continues to train and export them under bilateral labor agreements. So my question here would be, for the Asian context, shouldn't we be interrogating the moral economy of exporting workers trained with public funds to meet foreign labor demands, often under conditions that offer little long-term security or rights? My 4 points relates to credentialism as a tool of skill hierarchy and reproduction. And you mentioned that very well. So the structural critique is that credential recognition regimes function less as neutral assessments and more as gates of exclusion, often reinforcing epistemic injustice. So Link4Skills recommends improving EU credential system for migrants, but this misses very big issues that, in fact, one part of the world needs to conform to the other part of the world without using this dichotomy of global south and north, rather than creating mutual recognition protocols. So my question is, can skill migration frameworks be reimagined, not as integration into maybe Eurocentric or otherwise labor taxonomies, but as platform for transnational knowledge parity? And then new topic on board, which I want to maybe just signal: automation and AI, a new skill divide. So critical warning here is that the rise of AI and automation, which is also the topic of Link4Skills, risks deepening the divide between skilled and unskilled, now framed in the terms of technological literacy rather than education per se, which you mentioned as very important variable, years of schooling, for instance. So in our meta-analysis on AI and skills, we revealed that while high-skilled jobs are increasing in automated sector, low-skilled migrants are being displaced without pathways to upskilling. Yes. And the challenge to you, Gracia, is, does the social construction of skill framework sufficiently account for emerging technocratic filters like algorithmic hiring, AI-based visa scoring, that further depersonalize and stratify migrant evaluation, which you said about human capital dehumanization? And the last point of mine, there are policy risks of technocratic migration design. For instance, that there is growing policy shift towards designing migration to data-driven skill matching models. But this system often reifies static Western definitions of labor value. Even fair recruitment, which we want to advocate for in Link4Skills programs, fail when they rely on narrow, demand-driven frameworks that commodify human capital rather than value people holistically, as you advocated for that. So my question here is, how can migration policy be reorientated away from economic utility towards human flourishing, mobility justice, and reciprocity between sending and receiving countries, which is maybe utopian vision, but still worth mentioning, you know? So my concluding thought for discussion: if skill is social contract, as you approved, and migration regime are built upon it, what does this say about the legitimacy of the global migration system as it stands, and who gets to participate in its reimagining? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Isabel. These are really, really pointed questions as well as comments. I don't think I can actually answer all of them, but I think some of the things I particularly interested in, for example, how AI and automation actually could be compatible with the social constructional skill. And the thing is, I think we don't exactly know how this sort of direction that AI, in the introduction of AI and automation actually goes in terms of labor. And in a sense, sometimes AI and automation, especially when it's capable of offset some of the cultural barriers, will actually probably will induce cross-border labor mobility of different kinds. So I don't have a very solid research kind of findings to back this, but there is this study of for example, it's a very rudimentary kind of technology introduction into, say, care home in Japan. What actually it leads is originally, you know, the big barrier for having foreign migrants to take care of Japanese elderly is the language and cultural. But with the assistance of robots and AI, what actually this care work is now transformed into more kind of basic robot and technology maintenance. So the robot would kick in to do the cultural part, and the workers now could be just like IT workers or some people who do physical labor, then they don't have to communicate with the elderly anymore. So I think the introduction of AI and automation will change the work itself, but we don't exactly know how that is going to change the nature of the kind of skills that you know, will demand. It's just a shift of the skills because in any case, I think with the introduction of AI and automation, what a lot of countries now need more is really people who can be the engineers and maintaining that sort of technology and AI and IT kind of skills. And that actually is what we witness in a lot of corridors in Asia as well. Try to bring in that kind of workers. So, and then social construction essentially is a process. Then how, and I think the same kind of mechanisms of maybe the racialization or the de-skilling will actually be manifested in the new forms of labor mobility as well. So for that part, I think we need a lot more empirical evidence and observations to exactly know the process, how this is going to work. And I think you mentioned this, selectively you mentioned this, the you know, who define, who benefit from the labor, and why, you know, the moral economy of some governments who actually, even though they do need nurses and the construction workers, but they still produce those for export instead of for the local, you know, for the domestic development. I think this is really a collusion of different parties, and I think oftentimes there is this the difficulties. What I observe in Asia and in Indonesia in particular is the underemployment in a lot of that sort of sectors. So I think the employment system is a very problematic in those countries, and so it really de-incentivizes the participation of professional workers in those sectors, for example, nursing or other sectors, and it just that they do not provide enough remuneration or, you know, compensation for nurses, and so they just produce them for export. And for those countries, labor export constitutes a very big fraction of their GDP. It's too good to forsake. So that creates a situation that even though, you know, the Filipino people don't have very good health care, especially in rural areas, they don't have good doctors, nurses, and caregivers, but the caregivers do not want to work there because it's very poorly paid, and the employment structure is so ill managed to accommodate those people's professional needs. I think that's a very big problem in some of the export countries, and this is a problem. And also why some countries will be kind of brought in wholesale without credentialization. I think I suspect there is this historical patterns, the kind of career pathway institutionalized through the historical patterns. They have this, a credential matching, etc. And also, as the migration corridor typically advocates, is a feedback mechanisms. So when you have a new sending, countries, they obviously have to build the entire new system to recognize. So I think some of, for example, UK now recognize the Filipino nurses, and they will take them in without, re-credentialization. And this, so it requires a lot of institutional efforts to achieve those kind of goals. The most difficult question actually is what can the policy do? Obviously, we want not just workers, we want people, and we want, just the whole dilemma of the guest worker program in Europe. You want workers, but people come in, and how can we actually bring in people and make them fully capable, functioning, and also workers that will contribute in the long run? It takes a lot of experiment. And I was recently inspired by my Argentinian research colleagues who lamented basically the defunct of the Argentina experiment, 20 years of experiment of free mobility, which a lot of Argentina received a huge amount of migrants of all kinds from, say, neighboring countries, and people could work and achieve all kinds of social welfares very easily in Argentina. However, there's always this backfire, backlash against this sort of more humanistic, human-centered view of migration. And in the end, that 20 years of experiment somehow now is disappeared because of the backlash, and that the backlash actually came also from the former immigrants who benefited from the system. So it's a very political issue. So I really don't have very good answers, but we can discuss. We can continue the discussion.
Yeah. Let's open the floor because people are waiting. Thank you so much. They were great answers. So we have Rajan from India and Olga, who is specialist in Filipino migrants, especially in new destinations like Poland. So Rajan and then Olga. Thank you.
Yeah, I think I have no questions for Gracia anyway. So I have read your work, so I have no question. But I just wanted to add for people to discuss further on this issue, because even we certify somebody as a skilled worker from India, as you rightly said, they are being de-skilled in UK, Canada, Australia. In fact, I'm calling them some type of a new form of slavery. So they were, this is what I'm talking now in creating a new sense of they are not skilled migrant, they are a new form of slavery, and they are put in some type of work, especially the elderly care work in UK. They are giving 5-year visa and other things. So it's like a very very important that we have to recognize those issues, skilling and de-skilling and other things. And second thing is this, we know that, countries like Indonesia, India and other things, people go to the Gulf, they return back. So return migration is a huge task in many countries. And India now, they are talking about, when I talk to some of the people in the government and the Kerala government, is that we have to give them additional skills so that they can remigrate. So remigration, return to remigrate. People return, they don't settle down. Somebody comes from Gulf to Philippines, they may go back to again to another Gulf country. So for that, we are talking about additional skills. So the Indian Kerala government have a additional skills program. I think what their skills they give, we have no idea. But they are giving some skills so that they can go back again to remigrate. See, this is something India is doing, but how successful are that? We have not evaluated that. Additional skills for remigration. especially for the return people. And the third one, this skill. For example, India has a skill program, huge skill program, crores of rupees put every year. But I was in Delhi recently when the Ministry of External Affairs Minister was speaking to us about skilling. I saw the Indian ambassador to Germany. The Germany person was there. German ambassador to India was there. I met some people for our field work from German embassy and Austria, and also the Netherlands embassy there. So we are all talking about skill mobility, and India talking about emerging as a skill capital in the world. That's what the Prime Minister of India talks about, that skill capital. But what it means, nobody knows. It's like some type of what is skills? Are we talking about skills means who are going to get more salary? So I am just thinking that skill means what at the end of the day? Somebody is getting more salary, you think he's high skill? Can you link them the skills to wages? Because you may have high skill, your wages is low. So what it matter? You have a PhD, but you are getting say 1,500 euros. Okay, you are PhD, but you are getting 3,000 euros. So can we think of re-emphasizing what is actually, how do you see the outcome of skills? Suppose we say Gracia is highly skilled. What it means for us? How do you interpret that her skills, or how do you interpret? I'm looking for somebody who can, who I want to be a project manager for my project. So what is the skill you are looking for in terms of salary and in terms of their capability to be linked to the salary? So I think, can we imagine something that links, the skills linked to salary? This is something I wanted to open it up. And then, and the last point is, I do look at skills in a different way. Right now, I'm writing a paper for a conference on high-skilled migrants from India to Gulf. Now, what is high-skilled? Because we have low-skilled, medium-skilled, and skilled. I don't call anybody unskilled, because it is, I don't believe nobody is skilled. Unskilled is something I feel like a derogatory. Because, somebody making, when I go to a shop, somebody makes me a biryani. He may be unskilled worker, but I can't make biryani. So I have to respect his capability of making or somebody who is cutting my hair. He has skills. I can't cut my, I can't cut hair. So he is cutting me. So maybe you see me low skill, but for me, he has some skill. So I don't want to call even nobody unskilled. I will always put low skilled. I was low skilled, medium skilled, or semi-skilled and unskilled, skilled. Now skilled, I am looking at in terms of education. For example, I was looking at the data from the Kerala Migration Survey. Earlier, only 10% of the people who went from Kerala to Gulf were graduates. Now it has gone to 20%. So I am trying to link through years of schooling. So like somebody had 12 years of schooling, somebody has 15 years of schooling, somebody has 17 years of schooling. Can we put some link to the schooling? Or, like some people do talk about that in the skill, like years of schooling. So can we reimagine this? This is what I'm going to do on my, I cannot define high skill. For me, education, you don't have, for example, plumber, welder, doctor, nurses. Plumbers are high skilled for me, but somebody might say they are low skilled. I'm sorry, he is high skilled. So even the definition of somebody I treat as skilled in India, Japan might create as unskilled or semi-skilled. So that is, that is, because I know that a lot of Indians want to come to, Japanese. We are starting a Japanese language course in India. There is a signing of MOU between India and Japan. In fact, I met some people. They want to. I met a Japanese ambassador to India in the same conference in Delhi last week. So like what I define skill in India may not be the same way you define skills. Or you may say you write an exam, we'll approve your skills, like like Singapore does for Indian nurses. I know that. So I think this is something we can it's not the end of the story. I think we can really recreate the skill formation, skill issues, and skill thing. I'm going to stop here. First one, I don't need you need to answer, but you want to say something, Gracia, you are welcome to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rajam. And yes, and your points are very astute. I think the schooling really does not really measure skills. However, I think both skilling and salary are used in policies to measure skill. And schooling is a very much, is is the entry policy, right? How many years of schooling sometimes, oftentimes used by receiving government to decide whether they will give you the skilled visa or not. So, for example, in many destination countries, higher education is the criteria for skilled visa, and so I think for entry, oftentimes education is a benchmark. But the Indian doctor cannot work in the medical field in Japan, and he will be completely unskilled if he goes to barbershop. But I think actually the salary has been used as a criterion for skill in many countries as well. And it's when they decide whether they want to give you points to accelerate your permanent residency. So, or to upskill you. Taiwan now, domestic workers working in Taiwanese families, if they can make like 30,000 new NT a month, they will be given a middle skilled visa, because the salary becomes a criteria, a standard that measures your employer's satisfaction with your skill. So now they can, the domestic workers can become middle skilled and then essentially can become settlers in Taiwan if your employer is willing to pay you 30,000 NT or above. So yes, salary has become a criteria. In Japan, if you make certain salary and blue card as well, right? Then you get the blue card in Europe, and in Japan you can be advanced into this professional visa. So yes, these are, so what I call that is a neoliberal kind of market logic, but essentially. If your employer is willing to pay you that much money for whatever you offer. So it's a completely market logic, and the government just takes it as somehow objective. So yeah, I think these are very good points. Yeah, that's my reflection.
Yeah, we have one more points from Olga. Olga, the floor is yours.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And the last thing I would say about this presentation is that it was bored. I really appreciate it. And also what my forerunner said about the skills mismatch, habitus mismatch. I always use this concept of habitus mismatch. I think it's totally different view by, for example, Filipinos I'm working on, or I think also many Asian migrants. If we compare them, for example, how Polish people are feeling when they are de-skilling in countries like Norway or the others. But this is one of the outcomes I got. About the concept how the skilled category is embodied, I really like it. And I think it was the Francis Collins who wrote a paper about Filipinos who were not recognized as skilled agriculture worker in New Zealand, because they were coming from the Philippines, which were perceived as a corrupted country, and they don't believe that they have real skills. And the second one was they weren't recognized until they work at least 5 years in Saudi countries, where the farms were enough big to prepare them to work in New Zealand. So everyone was thinking that skill is also embodied in your nationality. In Poland, I could say, even looking at the Filipino nurses, in language skills, like if you are not speaking Polish in Poland, it's impossible for you to become a nurse if it's not the private clinic. And even though it's really rare in the private clinic. So I think how skill categories embodied in many, many things is very, very interesting. And the one example also from my research, because you said that it's really difficult to prove, for example, for most of the workers, actually, most of the overseas Filipino workers or other Gastarbeiters, that they have skill as a factory worker, for example. And from one interview with the consul in the Philippines, I learned that many Filipinos now, since they know that in Poland, the most demand work is the factory work, they're coming with the certification that they are trained to work in a factory, which is, of course, falsified, because something like this doesn't exist. So for the consul, is automatically presumed as they try to deceive the officials, and they probably will go to Poland for another purpose. So usually their visas are rejected. And this is also paradox, because people were trained for years that you should be recognized as a skilled worker to have a right to migrate, that they are trying to prove it still, while it's not necessary probably. And my question is, why probably it's so difficult for us in Central European Union, in Poland, to admit that maybe we don't need really high skilled workers. Like maybe we need factory workers, maybe we need people who work in agriculture, and we still usually use this notion that we are looking for highly skilled workers. We want the skilled workers, not the people who will just come here and they will just take a social or something like this. So why we need it, why it's so hard for us to admit that maybe the skill category is not something we really need. Thank you.
Thank you, Olga. And these are very good, thinking. And first of all, I think this Filipino agricultural workers is actually, I don't know if you know Yasmin Ortega. Yes, she's actually doing this
awesome.
agricultural farmers, and and also Andrew Paul's study of stepwise migration also helps here, because some of Filipino workers now will go to Saudi to get the credentials, right, to be the dairy farmers, because people say, wow, Philippines doesn't have a dairy farm or something.
Exactly.
So I think exactly that kind of, so migration itself has become a kind of a credential and a capital to be used to show, and also domestic workers, and there are a lot of house cleaners in Japan, but by being in Japan, having this work experience on their resume, they can show, actually, I'm a good worker, because that's kind of methods. Being employed in Japan has become a kind of a credential. So it's the same thing. But I think this notion of picking the highly skilled and rejecting the low skilled, or at least politically, I think really has a lot to do with I think this is it's a kind of it's a politics. It's entirely politics. It's who deserves, right? Who deserves to be part of the population, to be part of the society, and so this is the same in many receiving countries. They think if, and it's also a market logic. So if it's highly skilled, it implies that it's highly sought after. So you're competing for them. Somehow their worth, their value is much higher. And the so-called lower skilled is replaceable. There's a much larger pool, and also less cultured. So obviously these are more replaceable. So and politically, and the replaceable labor is always being more controversial and causing kind of a backlash. And also they're considered culturally less assimilatable and more problematic, going to be a burden on social security, etc., etc. I think this, Christian York's book, A Neoliberal Nationalism, is a very good piece to understand that sort of politics. As you said, a lot of countries, like even in Asia, like Korea, they need more manual labor than, say, highly skilled workers, because in Korea, the majority of people are highly educated. But still, politically, that doesn't fly. People want to have the good quality people. That's why in Singapore will institute those pregnancy tests. They don't want low quality people to be born to migrant women who are cleaning your houses, that sort of thing. So it's a kind of more
dehumanizing, really.
Dehumanizing, and there's somehow you really attribute a lot of qualities to so-called highly skilled worker. It's a market logic also at play. But these are very important issues. Yeah, we all have to deal with.
Yeah, Gracia, I promise the audience to give your articles, so please attach it to the chat.
I wonder how I can upload through this.
Or otherwise, please send it to Ivanka and or Emil, and I will attach it. It is in the chat. In the chat, you have plus.
Can I chat upload? I try to see.
Yes,
I
chat
cannot
upload with the plus.
With the plus, okay.
Plus symbol, and then you can upload the article.
So
any more questions?
I only have like a formatting options. So let me see. There any plus? Insert link.
Any more questions then in between? We will be uploading the article, and also I will be announcing the next lecture to come of Link4Skills Advisory Board. Any more questions for the so please send to Ivanka, otherwise we will send.
I'm sending to Ivanka then.
Ivanka, if you can upload it to the chat, otherwise please send to the emails of people who participated. Any more questions at the end? I think that there are more questions, but we are running short of time. I would like to announce just our next lecture of our colleague from a sister project, the GS4S, Professor Tesselce de Lange, who will deliver talk online June 17th at 4 p.m. Sharing her insights and her team GS4S insight and more legal perspective, because she is a lawyer, and more from the perspective of trade agreements and other stuff which relate to migration, labor shortages, and aspects which relate to labor migration, aging of EU population, reskilling, upskilling of human capital, and how we are going to make this policy mix in order to cope with the challenges European Union is experiencing. As the calls were about that, the three projects, Link4Skills, GS4S, and Skills for Justice, are collaborating closely to discuss these issues. So where we arrived at, we do have an article, so you are invited to open. No, this is different article. No, different link we got. Why labor is tightening UK immigration rules and what it means for migrants and employers. That's what we got, the link in the chat.
I've just sent Ivana the article.
Okay, but that's from Gabriela. Okay, you wanted to share. Gabriela left, I think. No, Gabriela is still here. Sorry, this is just from news, not an academic paper, but inspiring. Gabriela, would you like to say a few words about that?
Hi, everyone. I don't know if you can hear me.
We can hear you.
Yes, no, this is the topic of my research. I'm a professor of international migration at the University of Leeds in the UK, and we just got the news. I just shared the Guardian newspaper link that the Labour government, led by Keir Starmer, just announced a new restrictive approach to immigration, which shows that, unfortunately, the populist right is on the rise, and the Labour government is mimicking them rather than providing an alternative views. So just for curiosity, but thank you so much.
I think that's a pattern
really,
across Europe, to tell you the truth.
Yes, really inspiring talks. Thank you so much, Gracia and Isabel and everyone.
Thank you, Gabriel. Thank you for sharing. Ivanka, are you able to download it, or we will just provide everyone, because I don't want to keep people waiting for the file. I think Ivanka is making it. So without the further ado, I would like to thank you. Thank you, Gracia. Otherwise, we send everyone by email, as we have emails, because people needed to register to this talk. So we will provide you with the text, which will be a form of thank you, because it's not an open access article. So thank you, Gracia, for supplying
it. Will be open access in the fall, but I can just distribute the paper through the email. So yeah,
okay.
But I think any review now has open access, but it will be like half a year later.
Yes, exactly. Yes, exactly. So thank you again. Thank you, Gracia, for wonderful talk. Thank you for everyone for coming, and let's meet on the next Link4Skills Advisory Board lecture series, June 17th at 4 p.m. Thank you again.